Hi, I'm Madonna Guy, and this is The Natural Alternative. I am so delighted to welcome Neil Skilbeck to the program today. Neil has been in the industry for decades with huge amount of knowledge, and we're going to talk about the positive things we can do for our health today. Welcome, Neil.
So my background is originally I was trained as a naturopath, but and that's going back in the 1960s. So I've obviously been in the industry a long time. And at the college that I did my naturopathic diploma with at the time, they also included chiropractic because in those days, natural remedies or natural therapies were sort of more together rather than being specialized too much. And so I did both. And then when the government wanted to register people for chiropractic, then I had to go and get tested and all that sort of stuff. So they accepted me as a registered chiropractor as well. And then I moved to Queensland because I was in Victoria at the time. And then they allowed me to register as an osteopath as well because, I'd done a lot of training in different areas. So that's really my background. And so I guess over the last 30 or so, 30, 40 years, I've been more specialized in the chiropractic or the manipulative field.
Yes.
And we formed a college and taught people some of our methods because we invented various techniques. But in the early stages, it was more naturopathic, I suppose. And it's only because of my understanding. I'm not one for a lot of remedies. I think they have their place. I'm not saying that they don't, but I like to go back to basics and which is basically looking at people's lifestyle. And I find that's not a popular area to enter into. And so that's why I sort of went more to the manipulative side.
Yeah, right. I did a clinic experience with Henry Osiki about 30 years ago. And I remember him saying to me, and this actually, is amazing when you do clinic experience with someone like that. And he was already a published author. He had his own supplement range and all that sort of thing. And of course, his wife, Vera. And it was interesting because one of the things he said is that less than 10% of people will want to change their lifestyle.
Yeah.
So he said that why would you bother spending a lot of energy, which was sort of interesting to me at the time. And I stupidly took that on board because when you do have people as famous as him at the time, say that sort of thing and you're a young, inexperienced, like I was literally my third year naturopathy when he said that to me doing my clinic experience.
Right. Yeah.
So it's amazing how, and the last 3 years, if it's taught me anything, it has been rethink everything, question everything.
Well, I think that, because I was trained more in the very traditional understanding of where healing comes from, it comes from the sunshine, the fresh air,
Mother Earth,
and the exercise, and I call them the seven doctors, and that's really where I basically have centered most of my understanding through, and we can talk a little bit about that today if you wish, but
well, I really think people are at a spot on the planet where they're on a knife edge. If people don't start taking care of their own health in every way they can, they're not going to do well because we're in a really scary place on the planet at the moment with the way everything's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And so what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the difference between the philosophy of disease and the philosophy of health.
Oh, awesome.
And that's a very fundamental thing, and people can look at negative sides of things or they can look at positive sides. I'm not saying that there's no arguments on the negative side, but there's two ways of looking at the human body. You can either apply a remedy, and sometimes remedies can be natural or they can be chemical. and as you know, when you introduce something to the human body or you have some intervention that might have a side effect, while it might help one area, it probably is causing many other problems. And so we naturally prefer to use something that's not going to do any harm to the body. In fact, isn't that a doctor's oath that they do first do no harm?
Uh-huh.
And so when you're looking at treating disease, you're looking at it from a different point of view than if you're building health, because if your philosophy if you take into account that your philosophy is surrounding about the body being a self-regenerating mechanism, and that nature has armed it with over millions of years with huge amounts of protection, then you realize that if you can build the body up to its optimum level, then really disease can't come into the body. And there's a lot of arguments, and of course there's a lot of indoctrination with the idea that even healthy people can get sick. But it's my belief that if you build the person up to that optimum level, and the definition of health is lack of disease. So really, I don't believe that disease can really come into the body unless there's extraneous factors or something else that's affecting things. But that's my understanding, and that's how I believe nature works. And so the sickness industry, which of course, as you know, the pharmaceutical big pharma is into, they make all their money from sickness. And yes, I know a lot of other therapies and that do the same thing, but they're very well invested in sickness. And so
as are governments and so many private companies.
Exactly. They're all paid off, of course, from the big industries. And so, the governments, they subsidize a lot of the medicines which go towards all the rich people, which is the pharmaceutical industry. So really their business model is all about disease and sickness. And in actual fact, they have found, and I think everyone would agree with this if they look at this principle, that it's far better to maintain an illness than to cure it. And if you look at the amount of cures that come out of the pharmaceutical industry, they keep on saying that, they're finding a cure for this or finding a cure for that. But how many times have you ever heard of the pharmaceutical industry saying, oh, we've cured such and such? It just doesn't happen. It never comes up. And I've been, I listen to the TV the same as everyone else, and I'm sure if they had some miraculous cure that over the last, how many years I've watched TV, I'm sure they would have announced it. But they don't announce those things because they're not into cures at all, because if you can maintain an illness over a person's lifetime and take them out of discomfort and get them to operate as normal as they can, then that's far better off from a profit point of view than any other way of dealing with it. And so people have to realize, I think a lot of people are very naive. They think that governments and pharmaceutical industries are all people that are doing the right thing by people.
Yeah.
And I think they have to understand that it's a business.
Yes.
And a business has to earn profits for shareholders, and they come up with the best business model in order to do that, even though that may not be in the public's best interest, but it's certainly in their best interest. So
yeah. Have you heard of Dr. Rima Labo? Do you know Rima? She came out about the Codex about 20 years ago.
Okay, no.
Anyway, she's been a doctor for 53 years. So in 1965, probably, around the same time you were studying, she was in the States and she had her first day of med school. And you can imagine for a woman at that time, it was almost impossible. And she was sitting there, and on the first day in medicine, they said to the whole class, gentlemen, Drugs work in one way and one way only. They poison enzyme systems in your body. If we like the effects, we call that a benefit. If we don't like the effects, we call it a side effect. So she decided on her first day in med school, and she finished. She was a stubborn woman. So she finished med school, and in 53 years, I interviewed her at Christmas time. She has never once prescribed a pharmaceutical.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And she's cured people all around the world of many things, but she does stuff like vitamin C infusions and lifestyle changes, and she's an awesome human.
Mm.
Anyway.
Well, it's strange, isn't it, how one person can react that way and do the right thing, whereas all the others sitting in the class just took that as just part of the negative aspects of medicine.
Yeah, and they go, cool, let's poison people's enzyme systems for the rest of their lives. It's bizarre.
That's right. So I think we started out with this, what creates health, because if we're not going to get into the sickness industry so much and we want to look on the positive side, we need to understand that if we're going to be a therapist or just for people's general information, if health can be obtained even in our society, and no doubt there is a lot of shortcomings in the world we live in. I mean, we'd certainly be better out in the mountains where the fresh air and everything is, but even in our society, we can reach a level of health that I believe is sustainable and will protect us against illness. So I mentioned earlier on about the 7 doctors, as I call them. So I'd just like to name them just so
Perfect.
that people are aware of them. Our body will respond very positively when we place it in the right environment. And that environment includes sunshine, fresh air, and exercise, rest. Some of these things are opposite principles, but there's a balance, obviously, between the two. Water, pure water, particularly fasting is a very good therapy, and it relies on pure water to flush the toxins out of the cells. Also, I call it an alkaline diet, but a proper diet is important, with lots of fruits and vegetables, which are the alkalizers and cleansers, and also a positive mental attitude. They're the 7. And obviously, the benefit of that sort of environment helps to rid the body of toxic material, which really are the real causes of most illnesses, if we look at it. And if we go further than this into the germ theory, then we could look at germs being the cause of disease as opposed to the terrain. And the terrain is the toxic material. So a fairly simple example here is that microorganisms are designed to clean up waste material.
Excuse me.
All right. If you look at the outside world, if you put a compost heap or you just put any sort of rubbish down on the ground, after a while it'll just dissolve and you think, oh, that's magical, my smelly rubbish that I put out there is all gone, everything smells nice now and it's all sweet. And we probably, unless we think about it, we don't realize that the microbes have worked away and cleaned up humans' mess. And so that's one of their major benefits of having a microbe here. They actually feed on various toxic material, including certain chemicals and various things like that. And there's different kinds of microbes that do different things. So if that's their work on the outside, well, what do they do inside our bodies? And Béchamp, who was a researcher in France along with Pasteur, he maintained that the bacteria or the germs were actually created by the body. which sounds a bizarre kind of a thing, but if you understand the fact that the body is faced with toxic waste as part of its processing, and obviously if we add a lot of junk food and other things to it, it's even further burden. But even in our normal process of living, we develop waste material that has to get rid of. The body has many channels, the bowels, the kidneys, the skin, the breathing. It's all part of the body's way of dealing with waste material. So it's very logical that if that gets up to a certain degree that the body's finding difficulty with it, then it calls on the help of bacteria to help, or other microorganisms to help clean up the waste. And so, as you know, in our naturopathic philosophy, we believe that the body's efforts to deal with toxins, such as creating a temperature, or having diarrhea, or sweating of some kind, and it's all part of, and phlegm coming out, through the mucous membranes, the lungs, and so on. It's all part of the body's way of getting the waste out of the body. So if people start to focus on the real issues, which is the waste material, rather than looking at the bacteria or the microorganisms, because they're only there to do their job. And yes, we need a bit of protection in case there's an overpopulation of them. And so we do have T cells and many other natural killer cells, and various means of being able to control these things. But in a way, it's all part of nature's plan.
Yeah.
And so if you look at it that way, it's very positive, rather than looking at the fact that we need to be scared of anything. There's nothing much to be scared of at all. And I think people, if they understand how the body works, and this is part of the problem, of course, that I find, and you've probably found too, that very few people know even where their gallbladder is or their kidneys, let alone how it works.
Yes, and they certainly don't understand their immune systems.
No, that's right. So I think basic knowledge is a very good thing to enhance people's thinking, and because then when you have knowledge, fear begins to go out of the picture. Because knowledge gives you the power and strength to be able to understand what goes on. And I think that's part of the trouble, is we've been fed so much indoctrination for decades, and people have swallowed it all, and it only took the telly just to push them over the brink, and that's all it was. But it's all misinformation and indoctrination, and people just have to understand that the body is not helpless. The body is capable of doing some amazing things if you only put it in the right at the right environment.
Yeah. And with the germs, because we've been pushed for the last 3 years, about germs being the bad guys, and, washing our hands and wearing masks. And I've got clients who I've been talking to monthly for 3 years who are still going to wear their masks this winter because they believe it's going to protect them. Like, it stuns me that there is still that belief. Yeah.
Even though you obviously tried to educate them, they still can't throw off that old indoctrination then.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the whole doctors just being up on that pedestal, and they have been for 100 years. Yes. So, and I think they've been taught to be on that pedestal.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I think this is another thing people probably aren't aware of, is that the pharmaceutical industry is very powerful, and they realize that they can use their power for changing people and creating control fairly easily, because they're obviously they influence, and in fact have basically the World Health Organization in their hand, because as we know, all the information that they rely on is really coming from the pharmaceutical industry. And so not only has it captivated the World Health Organization, but people don't realize that even our watchdogs or the regulators in each country, um, as you know, we have the TGA here and the
Yeah.
FDA in America. All of these organizations are dependent on their income from the pharmaceutical industry, but which are the very industries that are supposed to be protecting us against any bad drugs or untested
Yes.
drugs coming in. And the TGA in Australia, for instance, it was during I'm just trying to think of, it was about the 1990s, I think. Howard was in power, and he changed the TGA to receive all of its income, or 99% of it. I mean, the government gives them a little bit, but 99% of their income comes from the drug companies. Can you believe that? I
It's
mean,
crazy.
if people knew that, they would say, well, what have we got a watchdog for if the
Yeah.
very people they're trying to watch are the people giving them all the income?
And the only thing that people like you and I see is that they're watching people like us and trying to regulate our industry because we're the dangerous ones.
Mm. Yep, that's
Even
right.
though idiopathic deaths is regularly between number 3 and 6 around the world in Western countries. So death caused generally by things that the doctors have prescribed.
Exactly. Yeah, the third leading death. Did you mention that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's usually between the 3rd and 6th, depending on how they manipulate the numbers. Yeah.
So people really need to start to see things for what they really are. They need to look behind the scenes. The average person probably is almost incapable because of the indoctrination, because they don't have any desire to just look behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's all we're encouraging. We're not saying they have to become a professor of blah 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 to understand it. All they need to do is look at a few simple things which we've been talking about, such as the profits that come from the sickness industry, the fact that the watchdogs or the TGA now receive all their information, all their money
Yeah.
from the pharmaceutical industry. So there's a conflict of interest. People just
Absolutely.
need to see these simple things. It's not
Yeah.
hard to.
And good old Billy Gates, so he put 55 million, I'm sure he put much more than this, but $55 million into vaccines for the last 3 years. It turned into $550 million profit. And now he's saying, oops, they don't stop transmission or transfection or death or disability or,
Oh, well, I
anything.
suppose he's owning up a little bit just to protect himself, perhaps. I don't know, but
Yes. No, it's very interesting. And I think that's probably been the good thing about the last 3 years is that so many people have peeked behind the curtain who never have
yeah,
before.
yeah.
But to me, it feels like the World Health Organization, they're like marching forward at the speed of light now, trying to pass rules. So you've looked at the international health regulations?
Well, not in detail, but I know that they're trying to pass rules so that they can automatically then, whenever there's a so-called emergency, and I mean, they can label anything as an emergency, can't they? And
Yes.
once
And
they
General
do that,
Tedros, he has just been given another 5 years as head of the World Health Organization.
right,
And he, of course, is a general. He's not a doctor, he's a general. And it's a very interesting time. If these international health regulations get passed, then the 196 member nations of WHO won't have a choice. It will be mandatory.
that's right. Their sovereign ship is gone then.
Yeah. And we
And
feel like we don't. Do you feel like we don't have a lot of freedom here in Australia?
oh yes, I mean, it's really. I mean, I suppose there's worse countries than us, and I suppose a lot of people think, oh well, everything's fine. When everything is not really fine, but they prefer to think that way because they don't have to do anything to change anything. Then, if they thought, I think it's only going to be a crisis that really wakes a lot of people up,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I totally agree. And if we sign, which we will sign these international health regulations. I think I interviewed James Roguski, I think in the first or second week of January, and he's doing like 2 Zooms every single day, and will do for the rest of his life if he has to. Like he's like, nah, we've got to stop these IHR regulations. So he is just working his tuchus off, educating people, because they're removing things from the World Health Organization. Like it won't be a suggested body anymore. It will be mandatory. They're removing all the words like it will be suggested to countries shall. There will be billions of dollars worth of fines for countries who don't follow the international health regulations. Like it's really quite phenomenal, the words. Oh, and they want to remove the words dignity. So dignity will not be part of the World Health Organization requirements anymore.
Why would countries submit to such terrible things that they're going to be fined if they don't follow it?
Yes.
Why would you agree to that?
Yeah. And before our last election, both ScoMo and Albo were asked whether they would support these things, and they both said yes. Of course we support the World Health Organization. We needed more input from there last time. We needed more. You know, they both laid down and said, yeah, of course we will. It's very interesting. And especially since obviously these politicians that people have been following for 3 years and for the rest of decades, but particularly the last 3 years, I never even knew we had health ministers so much before, you know, these people earning twice as much as the premiers.
You never heard of them too much, did you?
No. And they've taken over all over the world. It's been very, very interesting. And I don't think they understand health. They've been so indoctrinated in their industries as well that let's assume they're not just evil people. Let's assume they're trying to do good out there. But it has just been, it's like one level of information has come down and everyone around the world has just gone with it. It's bizarre.
Yeah. I think, again, the indoctrination of people over decades of the medical model has really put them in a position of power, because not only the people within a country tend to agree with that medical model, but the parliamentarians do too. So we sort of think, oh, maybe they're paid off, and maybe they are. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but at the same time, you can see how they would all fall in line because it's something they believe in anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think 99% of our politicians here in Australia have no idea about the immune system. They truly believe that it comes from injectables, and that if you don't get the injectables, then you do not deserve to be a citizen of a country. And how many politicians actually said that in the last 3 years?
Yes.
There's been abuse from many, many politicians for people who believe in their own immune system.
So I guess they've done their job well. I think it was Rockefeller. I think he was the one that originally took over the medical system, and
in about 1913.
He poisoned the whole system with his own ideas, knowing that down the track these plans would eventually create the necessary controls and so on that he wanted people to go through. And so it just continued on, and they've done their job well, really. We're trying to fight something that obviously has already been accomplished many years ago, and it's difficult now for people to just accept that health is not bought in a bottle. Health is not something that you inject into people's arm. It's a process of people obeying or coming into harmony with nature's laws. And if you violate those laws, that's when the problem exists, not some magical or invisible virus or something that's out there. That's inconsequential. It's your it's your a violation of health principles that create
Yes.
the illnesses. And people need to see that that's where it is. It's not, because all you're doing is you're creating fear, and fear. It's interesting, and this is what should get people thinking, that fear in itself is a violation of a principle of health. And so if the right people were doing the right thing, they would not be creating fear, because they know full well that fear creates disease.
Yes.
And so immediately you have a system that's trying to tell you what to do, and they're saying you've got to fear something. That'd be the very people I wouldn't want to be listening to.
Yeah.
And I think people should realize that there's no doubt that stress and violation of mental principles will create as much disease as anything else.
Yeah, totally. And, those people pushing the fear are the ones also benefiting from it.
That's the question. And
Yeah.
you just follow the money. And again, that's just lifting the curtain and having a look. As I said, you don't have to be a professor to understand all these things. They're very simple principles.
Yeah.
If you look at where the money is, what are they portraying to make way for their remedies or whatever they've got there? All these things make so much sense. I mean, you don't have to be that bright to see it.
Yeah. And people still push the whole gene philosophy. Well, it's in my genes. Of course, I've got high blood pressure. It's in my genes. Of course, I've got diabetes. It's in my genes. There's cancer. And people believe, because that's been pushed since the 60s or 70s or something. I think is it Bruce Lipton? He was one of the first people. Do you know Bruce Lipton? He's an American, and he was one of the first people to show the splitting of the cells on a petri dish, and showed that if he genetically modified something over here, it happened over there. But he also showed that if he changed the environment, the cells changed.
Okay.
So he believed in epigenetics before he knew it didn't have a name when he was doing that. So he's been doing the whole power of belief and power of positivity and positivity, that sort of thing for like 60 years.
Yeah, well,
he was a very young man in a lab.
Yeah, well, there's a branch of science that's demonstrating what we're saying, isn't it? That if your body's healthy, then the genetic structure of the body doesn't worry it too much.
Yes.
It's a very important thing, and it just illustrates that health is where we should be looking at rather than disease.
And where does the whole osteopathy and chiropractic fit into that? So,
yeah, well,
because I do structural kinesiology, so I've got my sort of idea.
Okay. Well, I believe that health has many aspects to it. Yes, if we're living in a good environment, as I've said, sunshine, fresh air, all those kind of things are important. But naturally, if we have an injury, and injuries can be just a local injury that you've done fairly recently, or it can be a series of small things where you're violating your body's mechanics. And after a period of time, that causes stress and strain on the mechanical system. And of course, the free flowing of energy, blood flow, nerve flow is a very important aspect to health, because, as you know, the spine is part of the central nervous system that sends out little messages via the nerves to all the organs and parts of the body. So it's obvious that mechanical problems can then interfere with that flow of energy and cause problems with organs, which will then reflect on your health. So, yeah, it's all part of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Bruce Dew is a trainer in kinesiology, or was many, many years ago. And he told a story once about teaching his students how to do 14 muscle balances, and big 14 muscles that would, structurally help the body. So because he was teaching kinesiology at the time, he'd get his students out there and they do a 14 muscle balance. And then as a chiropractor, they'd come into him and he was expecting that all of those muscles would be corrected. But what he found was, and he didn't realize the connection with this, because he was their main practitioner, they weren't really speaking to the little students out there who were doing their thing. They'd come in and then they'd talk about their kids or their dog or their parents or their life or their job or their friends and the stuff going on. All of a sudden, their body would go out again because the emotional gear changed their structures. So he would find that he would have to do some rebalancing, even though they had just had a balance in the other room. Because once again, all those aspects of health, if we're not clearing some of that emotional gear as well, then we can keep pulled back out of balance again.
Sure. It shows the integration of the body, doesn't it? That system is dependent to some degree on another system, and you change one part and it starts to change the rest. So it's all important. It's just, again, they're simple principles, but people have no idea. They don't realize that sitting in a chair day after day, it's one of the worst inventions that we ever made.
Sitting is inflammatory.
Yeah, it's not good. We were like the other animals. We were meant to be on the floor or on the ground. And once you get to a certain age, that becomes difficult. But, if we had maintained a lot of this lifestyle habit from when we were young, we would be nice and flexible, and we wouldn't be having problems with our joints and muscles like we are now if we did all that. So again, it comes back to just understanding nature's design for our body and working with those principles.
Yeah. So what are your, besides those seven keys to health, what are the biggest things you've been doing to keep yourself healthy over the last few years?
You mean aside from them or part?
So because I haven't had anything for the last 3 years, and so many of my clients are coming in saying, "Oh, I finally succumbed," and I think, did you really, or was your body just ready for a detox? Like, do you do any? So you do fasting? Yes. Do you do anything like juice fasts or like what type of things that people can really tangibly do? Because I believe in intermittent fasting as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Or do you more do like the 3-day fasts or in the phagocytosis?
Yeah. As far as fasting is concerned, I think it's a good general principle to do, because we tend to overload our bodies with a lot, well, not only too much food, but sometimes the wrong kinds of food. So, and that's the difficulty in living in civilization, I suppose, is that not all the foods that we eat are perfectly healthy for us. And so I always believe that we need to be better this year than I was last year. So a lot of people don't believe in self-development, but I think that we need to keep taking stock of ourselves, and we need to be moving forward rather than backwards. Yeah. And so that's one of the principles I firmly believe. I've found personally that I tend to overeat more than I should. And so by using diversions, going out and doing some interesting work in a workshop or in the garden or something like that, we need to occupy our mind on things away from the house or away from food, because I'm retired now, so I need to do that. Other people are going to work and that's not so bad, but then they have morning tea and afternoon tea, with biscuits and cakes and things. So they're still doing the wrong thing. But so I think that if we can start using restriction, because they always say that the pathway to health is the pathway of self-denial. That's an old saying. We need to deny ourselves. Now, people aren't into that too much. They come home from work and they say, I deserve this or I deserve that. That's not going to get you into a positive pathway, because all the things we think we deserve are usually not good for us.
Yeah.
So we need to practice self-denial, and fasting is part of that. And yes, I do occasional one-day fasts, and then over the years, I've built it up when I've done 2-day fasts, and then I've done 3-day fasts. I keep building it up. My advice to most people is just miss one meal and just have water, and because it's hard to just go on a full 2 or 3-day fast. And I think that any changes that you make that are too big are probably not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so it's the same with the diet. I tell people to don't stop, keep eating what you're eating, just double your fruit and vegetables in your diet, because you've got to give people positive things. People don't like anything taken away, but if you
Exactly.
give them extra things, they're happy with that. And then after they've got used to doubling the fruit and veggies, I say, okay, double it again, because you're starting off with most people, they only have about 10% of their diet is fresh fruit and vegetables. This has
Yes.
been brought out in a number of surveys. So if you double it, initially it's only going to 20%, and then double it again to 40%. By that stage, they're starting to suffer from bloatedness, and they're eating too much food because you're only adding more things and not taking anything away. And then it gets to a point where they have to take something away, and you let them decide on what those things are.
Yeah.
So it's the same with fasting. I think if you just say miss one meal and then have plenty of water, then maybe the following week or a few weeks' time, miss 2 meals, and just build it up slowly that way.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've been doing the HCG program with people for about 15 years. And that is really good for training people to do fasting days afterwards, because one of the philosophies of Dr. Simeon was to have and he died like, I don't know, 45, 50 years ago now, but he was the first doctor I ever heard of talk about the brain physiology in relation to weight. So the hypothalamus in the brain being one of the controllers of weight gain and weight loss. And the hypothalamus is what releases HCG, which lays down brown fat in and around the major organs of the body in order to keep people protected and safe when they are in a survival state.
Yep.
So, and it's amazing because the HCG helps to shift people's brown fat, so people feel like they're shrinking from the outside in, which is amazing. And then they maintain it because it actually eliminates fat cells, like, fasting can, because there's not many things that actually eliminate fat cells in our body.
Yep.
And if they've just shrunk, they're waiting for the next beer, pizza, cheese, crackers, whatever. Whereas if you actually eliminate them, and one of his things is a full day of fasting and having a nice big bit of protein and something fresh like an apple or a tomato for some enzymes, with it at nighttime. And it sort of trains people to do that for the day, which is really nice as a lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy to do things slowly, make changes slowly rather than quick.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And I like your the distraction concept. My brother, he's a counsellor. We've been chatting a bit lately. My other brother's a doctor, and he's believes everything the last 3 years, just saying. But anyway, so my brother, the counsellor, he's developed a process for people finding those missing parts of themselves, because we get so stuck into our world or our, weight loss journey or our health journey, we forget to do the fun things in life. What do we want to do? Do I want to be someone who plays guitar? Do I want to be someone who enjoys walking? Do I want to be someone who enjoys playing 10-pin bowls? Do I want to be someone who enjoys going on bike rides with friends? And we forget these things when we're so busy in our day-to-day stuff that we forget that life's meant for living.
That's right. It's not meant for grinding away day after day, working or, solving problems and that sort of thing only. We need to have the lighter side. And that's part of health too, isn't it? To
It is.
get that side of life.
And I believe one of the words that these international health regulations are trying to remove from the suggestions for health on the World Health Organization is happiness. Happiness not required for health.
Not
So
required.
yeah, so they're just, well, it's one of the regulation changes they're looking at doing, which just makes you think, what are they thinking? Well, we know what they're thinking because we don't need dignity, we don't need happiness. Very interesting.
Well, here we are, you know, these are principles that people need to see, because if as I said to you, if everything is going along the right path, I mentioned fear before, that should be a signal to people that there's something wrong with whoever's pushing these ideas. And here you've mentioned another one, that they're taking happiness out of the equation of what constitutes health. That, I mean, anyone with any brain can see that happiness is part of our formula for living.
Yeah. And I looked it up the other day when I was chatting to a doctor. As of 2022, we had 28% of Aussies who had been prescribed antidepressants in the last 2 years, over and above the normal amount. So we are just a poor little unhappy nation at the moment.
Well, that's another thing that people need to see, that there's always symptoms of discontent and problems within a society when you see things like that happening. And just lately, we've had a lot of young people doing all sorts of crimes. You probably
Absolutely. Very interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh, maybe it's happening, maybe it's not. But the people next door, someone broke in 2 nights ago and stole their car. So, you know, it's all these things are a product of society when things aren't going right. We've had long-term illness, you know, chronic illness for a long time, and people ignore that and they just think, oh, that's part of life. Well, it's not. It's not.
It wasn't 60 years ago. I think there's a statistic that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gives, which was back in 1965.
Yes.
A small percentage of people, I can't remember, it was like less than 15% of people had chronic illness. And now over 65% of people have an autoimmune disease where our immune system is attacking ourselves. Like, so our immune systems are just so overloaded with all of this, whether or not it's genetic modification, whether or not it's the crap in our water, whether it's the crap in the skies, whether it's the pollution, you know, whether it's our thoughts, our anger, our fear, our frustration, our anxiety, that our bodies are attacking ourselves. It's phenomenal.
Look at the amount of injections now that an average person gets in their lifetime.